Hi folks, Adam Andrews here from CenterForLit with another small contribution to the great conversation. You know, everybody wants to give their kids a good education, whether they plan to teach it themselves or enroll in a quality school. But how many of us ever stop to think about the definition of the term education? What is it we're really trying to deliver? This question is worth considering, if only for the reason that we don't think about it very often. It turns out that our unexamined assumptions are the ones we have to be the most wary of. So what does the term education mean, anyway? Well, one answer is that education is the process by which you acquire the skills necessary to be successful, to make for yourself a comfortable and prosperous life. By this definition, education has a lot of similarities with job training or advanced technical training. And by this definition, we would often consider doctors, lawyers, professionals, or experts in one field or another as the most educated people that we know. There's a certain amount of respect that goes to people who are educated like this, right? I mean, we tend to respect our doctors, for example, whether or not we know anything about them personally, simply because of their advanced training and their knowledge of the body and its processes. But there are a couple of assumptions that lie behind this definition of education as technical mastery, assumptions we don't often think about. And the first one is that reality is primarily physical or material. We've learned this from going on 2 centuries of scientific change and social change and religious change, but it's pretty well agreed upon by most people in society that the important things in this world, the things that are really real, are the things you can see and touch and feel and repeat in a laboratory. And if this is what reality is, that is, if reality is primarily physical, then education must be something like mastery of the physical world. This is why we consider doctors, lawyers, and scientists the most educated people in our society, and why our educational institutions are prejudiced toward turning out such professionals. But what if the most important aspects of reality are not physical at all? What if they aren't even natural, but supernatural? A lot of folks would probably agree with this idea, but we don't consider its implications for education very often. If it's true that reality has a supernatural component that is beyond the ken of our powers of observation and manipulation and control, then education begins to look less and less like mastery and more like something else. If education amounts to an understanding of the world and how it works, then mastery becomes a weaker and weaker concept the more we know about the non-physical nature of reality. One of the oldest works of literature in the Western tradition suggests a different definition of education that's based on this second supernatural view of reality. It's the book of Job in the Old Testament. It describes the career of one of the most successful men in the ancient world. We find out in the first part of the story that Job is prosperous and upright. His activities suggest that he knew very well which techniques led to this prosperity and how to perform them in the proper manner. The story tells us that he feared God and shunned evil. He not only made sacrifices for himself on a regular basis, but also for his children, in case they had offended God by the parties they regularly attended. I wonder if Job ever connected his uprightness with his prosperity and saw them in a cause and effect relationship. I think the author of the story put these two things, prosperous and upright, in the same sentence on purpose to suggest this very thing, that Job, in his pursuit of prosperity, knew how to master the techniques which led to it. Now, in the ancient world of Job, those techniques had to do with religion, with making sacrifices to appease God. But I think if Job had lived in the 21st century, he may have been the kind of guy who, in his pursuit of prosperity, mastered some scientific discipline, or mastered some professional discipline, or mastered some technological discipline, knowing that it would produce prosperity if the steps were followed with dedication and with discipline and with single-minded purpose. Because Job wanted prosperity for himself and for his family, he did what was necessary. He mastered the techniques. Job, in fact, had some of the same assumptions about education that I've been talking about. He assumed that heaven hangs levers down within the reach of man, and that all it's necessary for a man to succeed and prosper is to master the grasping and pulling of the levers of heaven. And he assumed that education consists in learning what these levers are, and learning how to grasp them, and learning how to pull them. Well, if you remember the beginning of the story of Job, you must admit it seems to have been working. Job is prosperous among all the people of his day, and he has flocks, and he has herds, and he has children in abundance. But of course, we all know what happens next. God allows Satan to come and strike Job in all of his areas of sufficiency and bring all of his substance to nothing. Satan comes and takes his children. Satan comes and takes his possessions. Satan even comes and takes his health, until Job, left desolate, sits in a dirt pile, sprinkling ashes on his head and praying to be delivered from his affliction. His wife even calls upon him to curse God and die because he's so miserable. I wonder if Job's misery didn't stem, at least in part, from the fact that the rules for attaining prosperity, the rules of mastery leading to success that he had depended on, were so confounded and so obviously did not work. I get this impression because of the long conversation between Job and his comforters that follows this initial disaster. His three friends come from a far country, as you probably know, and take turns trying to explain to Job the reason and the cause for his distress. And the four of them have a heated argument for several chapters. In fact, a large portion of the book. And they argue in raised voices about this question of the source of Job's distress. And though they appear to be disagreeing, I think it's interesting that they have a couple of important assumptions in common about education and about mastery and about success. It turns out they all agree on the idea of heaven and its levers. They all agree that God is bound to reward with success those who perform the necessary steps. They all agree that God can be expected to bless those who make the proper sacrifices, and can be equally relied upon to curse and judge those who fail. The only point of any substance on which Job and his three friends actually differ is whether Job has performed well or ill. Job says he's performed well, and his friends disagree. In fact, you might restate their disagreement in terms of the assumptions they make about education. Job says he has mastered the techniques necessary for success and cannot explain why he has failed. His friends say he must not have mastered them at all. If this is the sum and substance of Job's disagreement with his friends, then they really are missing the point. And that's what the rest of the story of Job is all about. Because Elihu, the fourth comforter, comes in at the end and suggests that they don't know anything about education at all. He asks the friends a rhetorical question. Does it hurt God when you sin against him? Does it help God when you do something good? Obviously not. Elihu laughs at the very idea that a man can manipulate God with levers. No, he says, God is the one who acts. He brings circumstances into a man's life, even bad ones, in order to show him mercy, to bring his soul back from the pit, as it says in the text. Yikes. Elihu suggests that the assumptions Job and his friends have made about education and mastery actually amount to worshiping themselves in place of God and putting their souls at risk of damnation. Well, God comes in and doubles down on Elihu's testimony in his famous address from the whirlwind, which begins by destroying Job's reputation as a master of anything. Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge, God says. None of your basic assumptions are correct, he says. In particular, your assumption that mastery of the proper techniques is possible and necessary to success. God lists a bunch of his own characteristics, a bunch of his own feats of mastery, you might say, and creation, and love, and grace, and care for all his creatures, and rhetorically asks Job if this is the kind of mastery he, Job, is capable of. The only response to this line of questioning, of course, is no, of course not. I have no business in this conversation. God suggests that something besides a mastery is necessary for a human creature to be properly educated. In fact, just the opposite of mastery is necessary. In fact, something opposite to mastery is the only thing necessary to a good education. Job shows that he has received such an education at the climactic moment of the story, when he says, "What shall I say to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I have spoken of what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know." It's a profound and devastating moment of self-realization. Job sees himself clearly for the first time, not in his mastery, but in his ignorance. I think it gives us a pretty good picture of what a true education is. It's humility before God in the mind as well as the heart. It's knowing that we, as God's creatures, receive everything we need from His hand, pleasant circumstances as well as difficult ones. And furthermore, that both kinds are really acts of divine mercy, designed to save our souls from the pit. Realizing this truth about human nature and man's relationship to God and His world is the true mark of a real education. It amounts to humility in the mind and heart before the Creator who mercifully provides for us through circumstances, both pleasant and difficult, to save our souls from the pit. We don't pull His levers. He moves the world for us on His own. All efforts toward mastery of the materials of that world, unless pursued in the context of this basic, fundamental humility, will inevitably lead to arrogance, discouragement, frustration, and futility, not only in the material world, but in the spiritual one too. On the other hand, grasping this lesson with the heart and mind frees a person up to pursue mastery of any skill appropriately. Expertise acquired in humility is the glory of an educated person. Why are we so enthused about this kind of education at Center for Lit? It's because the great books of the Western literary tradition, our favorite stories, turn out to be the best tools ever devised for producing it. The example of Job that I've just referred to is only one of a million other stories, each one offering a unique answer to the question, what sort of creature is a man? And what is the secret to living well in this world? Reading great stories and understanding how they ask and answer this question is the shortest road we know to true education, the kind that makes people successful because it makes them self-aware. I hope you find it in the great books for yourself, and if there's any way we at Center for Lit can help, just let us know. Meanwhile, like and subscribe for more. And if you're interested in joining the conversation at Center for Lit, click the link in the description below. Happy reading, everyone.